The provocation cycle. Um, it is July 13th, just after 9 o'clock Colorado time. It's just now cool enough to turn off the air conditioning, open up the windows, and try and get some stuff done. The provocation cycle goes round and round. Ahmaud Arbery was shot to death by racist thugs on February 23rd, 2020. He was jogging through a neighborhood with some construction and stopped to drink from a faucet on a site. Three men confronted him as he jogged back out on the road: Travis and Gregory McMichael and William Bryan. They boxed him in with two vehicles, pickup trucks. They confronted him on foot, armed with firearms. They brandished weapons at Mr. Arbery. He fought for his life, was shot to death. The police did nothing until video surfaced months later. Mr. Bryan had recorded the incident on his cell phone. Outcry ensued when the video reached the media, forced to actually investigate the crime. Eventually, the government tried and convicted all three murderers. The government involvement is not the important part of the story for this lesson. What I want you to know is Mr. Arbery lived and died in Georgia. Georgia is second in the nation for total number of lynchings, behind only Mississippi. 438 people have been murdered by lynching in the grand state of Georgia, most of them black men. When Mr. Arbery was confronted by three white men who fit a particular stereotype, wielding guns, they did not have to point the guns at him to threaten his life. They did not have to exit their vehicles and approach him. Their presence and commanding tone would be totally sufficient for anyone who knew anything about the last quarter millennium of American history. The three murderers instigated a confrontation. When Mr. Arbery defended himself, they shot him to death, and they almost got away with it. Cal Rittenhouse did get away with it. Cal Rittenhouse shot two people to death and injured another at a rally in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Right-wing media radicalized him and made him think it was his duty to defend property against peaceful protesters. The right-wing media and paramedia labeled Antifa looters, thugs. He brought a weapon similar to an AR-15, a Smith & Wesson M&P 15, to the rally. This was late 2020. The regular media were just beginning to cover mass shootings as a serious issue. Shootings, when politically motivated, are done by right-wing adherents, by and large. Christchurch, for example. And the left, the sort of people protesting the murder of George Floyd, knew we were potential targets. I protested the murder of George Floyd along with about 400 or so other people downtown in my city. And yellow armbanders and 3%ers and other racist militias showed up, packing M16s or their civilian equivalents, pistols. It was very threatening. It was very threatening, which was the point. I engaged some of these people in unwilling conversation. They engaged me and my spouse in some conversation against my wishes and will. They were fucking crazy. And these were the same people who January 6th sensitized to the presence of assault weapons in public places, held by the kind of men often guilty of such violence, Joseph Rosenbaum acted. He chased Rittenhouse and tried to take the weapon. Rittenhouse shot him and ran. Anthony Huber heard the shots, saw him running, and correctly thinking the worst, tried to stop Rittenhouse, who killed him too. A third man, Gage Grosskreutz, attempted to stop him and was non-fatally shot for his trouble. Rittenhouse was tried and acquitted. He provoked the incident by bringing a military-grade weapon to a peaceful protest. He provoked three men into trying to prevent his potential violence and then shot them. The courts found him to be acting in self-defense. You are not allowed to defend yourself against gun violence until the heavily armed racist militias are actually firing upon you. This is all context for the apparent assassination attempt against former President and current felon Trump earlier today. I'd like to note that nearly every rally attendee and Republican operative interviewed by the news media has referred to Mr. Trump as President Trump rather than former President Trump, and has not been corrected by reporters. Understandable under the circumstances. And yet this plays into a right-wing conspiracy theory that Mr. Trump is secretly still the president after Mr. Biden stole the election, the freest, fairest election in decades. To the point, Mr. Trump advocates political violence every day of his life. He puts out hit lists in the form of invective against his enemies to rile up his supporters to do something, stochastic terrorism in the vein of Henry II, lamenting, "Will nobody rid me of this meddlesome priest?" He tells his crowds that foreigners are raping their women, taking their jobs, bringing drugs and crimes, celebrating on the rooftops after 9/11. He says the radical left Democrats are murdering babies, stealing elections. You know what? You've heard him. Refer back to my previous video on rhetorical violence and the results thereof. The murder of thought and ideas, riling up limbic systems and clannish behavior with a K. He primes his people to fight, and the result is that they do. Remember that word for later. On January 6, 2020, a riled-up mob of racist militiamen and gangsters overran the U.S. Capitol building to stop the confirmation of the legitimate election results that would remove Trump from office. 2020? 2021. 21. People died. Police officers were injured and some took their own lives after the trauma. It is inevitable that when a man commands mobs to attack you day after day, threatening a second civil war, that eventually somebody will feel so threatened they have to do something. But Mr. Trump is not acting alone. Project 2025 is the brainchild of the new, more overtly fascist version of the Heritage Foundation. They proudly advocate the overthrow of democracy and the installation of a Viktor Orban-style Christo-fascist state. Biden cannot seem to get any good reporting, despite a stellar track record, thriving economy, and nearly scandal-free administration. Thus, he cannot break out ahead of Trump in polling, and it looks like Trump has at least an even shot of being president again. This is a threat. This is a loaded M16 at a peaceful rally. It's pickup trucks and sweaty, overweight, sunburned redheads with rifles. That's not all. In addition, because Mitch McConnell stole the Supreme Court for Trump during the Obama administration, a 6-3 majority has been shielding Trump from prosecution, heightening his chances of re-election, and eliminating any checks and balances on the 2025 heritage agenda. This is all very scary. I am terrified. I don't want to live in a fascist nation, and it all seems so Inevitable. There are no checks, after all, on the Supreme Court. So it's inevitable that when our options are reduced to fighting back or being murdered, some people will choose violence. The Heritage Foundation says this second revolution on their part will be bloodless as long as its victims allow it to be, which is tantamount to saying, well, we wouldn't have had to rape you if you had only consented. Understandable. I neither advocate for nor against. I'm a factual reporter to the extent possible, and history is littered with genocides that might have been prevented if we learned Popper's paradox a little earlier on, but here we are. I came here to say when you try to shoot Mr. Trump at a political rally, that is what he wants. He's well protected. You have a tiny chance of success. And you make a martyr, a bloody-faced, fist-raising, angry man who can then turn about and say, see, I warned you, the radical left liberal Marxists were violent savages, and they are, and thereby justify the violence the right already intended and have already initiated against our democracy and against our bodies. Trump being hauled off by the Secret Service with his face bloody, raised his fist and appeared to say, fight, fight. Having instigated this violence, he wants it to come to that, to the violent overthrow of American democracy and his installation. This is a battle for democracy, for the so-called soul of America, and it must, absolutely must be won at the polls. We absolutely must turn out in such numbers as to break the gerrymandering. Yes, again. And again. And again. Far into future. Against all odds.